So Steve, the Nintendo Switch 2 released 3 weeks ago now, leaving us with 26 different launch games. And over those 3 weeks, we've been chipping away at every single one of them. And on the channel, we've reviewed some of them independently. But right now, we're going to review everything we haven't touched, reiterate on some of the stuff we have touched, and just give general opinions. So what do you feel like beginning with here?
Even though we've already reviewed it, I feel like we need to talk about the game that every single Switch 2 owner has almost certainly played, and that's Mario Kart World. It's Nintendo's big first-party title, and I think Daniel did a great job with the review, but it's the one that everyone here has an opinion on.
Exactly, yeah. So Daniel gave it a 9 out of 10. He has some very good, balanced, positive and negative takes. Something very odd happened today, actually, with the patch. I'm not sure if you've seen it, but when you play online in Mario Kart World and you try and just do regular versus races, the only way to get 3 laps previously was either hope that a 3-lap is one of the options, which it very rarely is. It's usually the intermission tracks. But something you could do to guarantee all the time that you get 3 laps was choose random. And they've just patched it so that choosing random now favors the choices it gave you. So it's not, when you choose random, you're not choosing any random track. You're prioritizing the 3 tracks they gave you, which usually aren't 3-lap tracks. So they've made it really hard to play online with 3 laps with randoms. And I don't know why. You'd think that would just be a separate mode, and that does kind of ruin a big part of the game for me.
Yeah, it's an incredibly weird decision, because I think that, you know, when I hit random, it's because I don't like the 3 choices that were presented. And I know that you can hit, you know, plus and go to the whole map and choose a different track that way.
Well, with friends you can, with randoms you can't.
Oh, you know, I've never played with randoms, so that makes sense. Yeah, that just feels limiting and strange. Like there doesn't seem to be a good reason to do that. So I think maybe this is a case of where they thought that people expected that random would choose a random one out of the 3 that they were looking at, but to me, I always expected random to just help me escape that list of 3.
Yeah, that's what it used to be. But, you know, the game itself, though, is terrific. All the parkour systems are really, really innovative, and the things that people are doing with them are nuts. I found myself, when I began, I was quite flimsy with it. I was trying to jump onto rails, I was just bashing into them. But I've gradually gotten better, and it feels like the skill ceiling for this game is really high. And that's just talking about the mechanics. It's really about the world itself. And the open world, I think, makes a lot of sense when you play Knockout Tour, when you're just continuously driving from point A to point B to point C to point D, you know, just a continuous wave going through roads to get to those properly structured tracks. And I think the open world's wonderful in that instance.
Yeah, you know, I've really been enjoying the open world of Mario Kart. I actually recently picked up just starting to play free roam with my family, because it's not very fair to play Mario Kart against a 9-year-old. And, you know, my daughters would get discouraged pretty easily, you know, if we're racing and I'm not intentionally holding back. So instead, we just kind of drive around the open world, and they help me find blocks and switches and puzzles and challenges. You know, we have a lot of fun just doing that, and they love unlocking costumes. You know, my daughter and I explored for probably 4 hours the other day, just kind of driving around, and she'd be like, "Oh, Dad, I found this," and I could open up the map and teleport to her, and then help her solve whatever puzzle she's looking at. And that's some of the most fun I've ever had in a Mario Kart game.
Oh yeah, it is amazing for kids of all ages. My 4-year-old daughter, we recently got her playing on a Switch Lite with Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. And the problem with that is she enjoys it, but she falls off a lot and gets kind of frustrated and asks me to turn her around if she's going the wrong way. With Mario Kart World, though, there is no wrong way in the open world. You just keep going. You know, you fall off a big structure, you land in the water, you keep going, you find a bridge, you go to land. It's terrific for kids. And do you remember when we were younger, like playing Mario Kart 64? You go into that track that's Peach's castle in, and like you want to explore, you want to go off the track and like see what the castle's all about. That's just one track, and that's just one instance. And this is a whole game of moments like that. And I think that's amazing.
Yeah, it's really cool to see that they've kind of realized what the limitations of Mario Kart were and removed them in a sense. To me, it feels really nice to be able to, you know, I agree with you. I remember seeing Peach's Castle is specifically that in 64 and wanting to go off track and look at it, of course, that wasn't possible. And so being able to just satisfy that curiosity and drive around and explore and see everything the way you always wanted to is really cool. And like you said, to bring it back to the actual core conceit of Mario Kart, the racing, the gameplay feels fantastic. It is such a fun new take on Mario Kart, and the water physics are incredible.
Oh, yeah.
Like anytime there's water, I try to go that way.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And there's so many mechanics to that as well. Like you can boost off waves. If someone's hit by a blue shell, they send out like a big tidal wave that you can boost off. And I love that you can also maneuver yourself in the air now. So previously, like you press the drift button in the air to get a boost. Now you can do that, but you also shift left, right, up, down when you boost. So that there's a reason to keep boosting in different directions to kind of push yourself that way. It really feels like Mario Kart's never tried to be this skillful before. And people, like, they found the pros played out Mario Kart Wii because there's so much to exploit in that game. But it never felt like it was built to be like that. Whereas this one, like, you can play it just with your kids, but there's also a few P-switch missions in this, which definitely do demand a lot from you. There's one in the Shy Guy Bazaar where you're meant to be just, like, jumping off the walls, going onto rails, finding your way to the higher peak. It really does push you to learn how to get good at all this parkour stuff. And I bet Sonic is kicking himself, Sonic Racing, the Crossworlds, after seeing all this rail grinding stuff. I bet they're like, man, that should have been us.
Yeah, it is very much a trademark Sonic thing to do that. And the other thing is that when you do those moves, you gain a significant amount of speed. Like it gives you a major competitive advantage to know how to do those, not just because you're potentially avoiding other racers, but because you're really boosting your maximum speed for a brief period to where you can blow past a lot of karts.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot I love about this game. I think the open world is just great. If you're maybe a bit older, you probably won't find as much purpose in it. The P-switch stuff, that's all fantastic. But I think it really shines with kids who can just keep roaming around and exploring. And I love Knockout Tour. I think that's my favorite Mario Kart mode. Battle mode is good. A lot of the tracks get recontextualized, so there's like the Peach Stadium, where a lot of the underneath of the track is the Battle Stadium. And in the vanilla Mario Kart 8 on Wii U, you had like Moo Moo Meadows as a track, which you're just going around in a circle. It's kind of boring. It comes back in this game, though, as a battle track. Only this time you can go in the middle of it. So it's not just a loop. They've kind of made it into a big course now. So just making it open, it allows that stuff to make sense now. I wish there were more modes than just balloon and coin, but maybe they'll come in the future. But the battle mode is a lot of fun too. My only real sticking point is Grand Prix and General Versus modes. I think those intermission tracks make a lot of sense in Knockout Tour. They make less sense in Grand Prix. I'd rather that just be 3 laps.
Yeah, I agree with that. I feel like Knockout Tour is really the highlight mode of Mario Kart World. It's something that wasn't possible in previous generations. It kind of shows off what Nintendo was thinking for the future of this series. But I still like the idea of having the more classic take. I like the 3-lap courses.
Yeah. I
think that's something that everybody really likes, which is why you're seeing a lot of people choose random so that they can get a 3-lap course. And I wish that we'd have a mode that strictly uses the older style of Mario Kart in addition to these really cool, exciting new things. I feel like it's a missed opportunity.
Yeah, it's so easy to fix my problems with this game. Just in online, add a general 3-lap category. You can keep the current one, just add a new one. Add a few more battle modes, and also make open world co-op, because you can definitely free roam split screen in local lobbies if you're doing local wireless or online with friends, but you just can't do split screen as a general mode. And I feel like that you shouldn't have to be waiting in a local lobby to make exploring together, possible.
Yeah, that feels like a real, just obtuse decision. If it's possible in any way, then it should be possible, with just as a selection from a menu. And I feel like Nintendo does a lot of these things where they include something and they just don't think it all the way through to its logical conclusion of what players might want. And this is this is definitely an example of that.
Yeah, so hopefully they fix this up. But otherwise, this is a wonderful game, and it's something you can just keep on playing for the whole generation, like we did with Mario Kart 8. So I have very little negatives, just nitpicks that I hope get resolved in a patch, because they are very patchable. But otherwise, I very much agree with Daniel's 9. I think this is my favorite Mario Kart.
Yeah, it's my favorite since Double Dash, and that's saying something. I love Double Dash, so for me, this is also an easy 9.
Cool. All right, let's go on to another game then. I was going to go on to another racing game, but let's mix things up. Let's go with Sonic X Shadow Generations, because the Switch version of this game was 30 FPS in both modes, so both the Sonic mode and the Shadow mode. And the Shadow mode was very low resolution as well. So this is the first time we've had a proper, portable Sonic Generations, full clarity, and Shadow Generations at 60 FPS. I gave this a 9, so I'll give you the floor. What do you think of this version?
So it's interesting because I think that it is the best version of, well, not, this is difficult. This is something that I find as kind of a point that I struggle with multi-platform Switch 2 games, because most of them aren't like objectively on paper the best version of the game. So,
Sure.
you know, it's not as good as PS5, because how could it be in terms of visual fidelity and performance? But it is so close that the differences are negligible, particularly in handheld mode. And that to me is pretty wild to think that, you know, something on a portable console is giving the PS5 a run for its money, you know, even from a horsepower standpoint. So that kind of puts it over the top for me. And while it may not be in a purely technical sense the best version, it is my favorite version.
I'm in the exact same camp. I think the reason I gave it a 9, even though there's some funny business, like there's no free upgrade patch. So if you, or even upgrade patch, not even free, just there's no upgrade patch at all if you bought this on Switch 1. So you got to buy it again. But the reason I gave it a 9 was because the PlayStation 4 version is actually 30 FPS in Shadow Generations. And you know, Switch 2 is so often compared to PS4 in power, PS4 Pro. But you know, PS4, PS4 Pro, Xbox One, Xbox One X, they could all only do 30 FPS for Shadow. And so this is a little bit of a technical showcase. You know, portable 60 FPS Shadow Generations on a little tablet. And I think that actually is really impressive.
Yeah, it's really cool to see, you know, things that are kind of considered to be limited to current gen, and that's going to come up with for a few games in this list as happening on Switch 2, right? And so that to me is really cool. You know, I haven't played a ton of Shadow Generations on any platform really, but I did dig into it on the Switch 2 specifically, and you know, it's definitely one of those cases where it's impressive because people were saying before the Switch 2 came out, you know, I remember during the FTC trial and all that stuff with Xbox, where they were saying that it was essentially a PS4, and it's clearly more than that. It's clearly somewhere between the PS4 Pro and the PS5, which is way better than I expected for a portable console. And to see Shadow Generations running at 60 FPS, you know, it kind of gives that feeling of, okay, we're not just going to get last gen games running at really nice frame rates. We're getting current gen titles running in a comparable way to, you know, set-top box hardware that's meant to be as big as it can to cram in as much power as it can, and that is really exciting. I do think this is, you know, absolutely deserving of a 9 because it's a great game. Sonic Generations is one of the best Sonic games to come around in a really long time.
Yeah.
So I'm happy that it got a modern re-release because I've played my Steam copy probably, you know, 50 times at this point, and to have that in a portable form factor with no compromises in terms of, you know, how the game performs. Yeah, it's just excellent.
Yeah. There is a 30 FPS quality mode for Shadow. Don't use that. It feels awful.
Yeah.
So let's move on to Street Fighter 6. You've been handling this primarily. I've done a lot of online, but I've not actually touched any of the single-player modes, so I'll let you take the wheel for this.
Yeah, so Street Fighter 6 is probably my most played game of this generation. Ever since it came out on PS5, I have just been grinding it every single night. Like it's a nightly ritual that I'll hop on and play a few ranked matches. So I am deeply familiar with how Street Fighter 6 behaves and performs on PS5, PC, and now Switch 2. And I've mentioned this before in my comparison for the game on Switch 2. But if you have a keen eye, then it's, the downgrades are obvious. There's less striation in Ryu's muscles. There's no depth of field. But you're not really looking at those things when you're playing. If you're in the middle of a fight, you're not checking to see how vascular Ryu's forearm is. You're trying to land moves and not lose. And what I found is that this is a very technically competent presentation. Even on a 65-inch 4K TV, Street Fighter 6 on Switch 2 holds up remarkably well. I've played quite a bit of World Tour mode, which is, the single player you alluded to, and that runs really nicely on Switch 2. It doesn't have the same 60 FPS option that the PS5 does or that the Series X does, or it's more akin to the Series S presentation where the open world is at a mostly solid 60 FPS. Like, it'll drop to like 59, 58, but for the most part it stays at 60, and then the fights are at 30 FPS. And while that cut between, fighting with someone in the open world and going back and forth can be a bit jarring, the fights are at a rock solid, no dips, 60 FPS, or 30 FPS, my apologies. And I feel like I would love to have the option to, lower the visual fidelity and get my 60 FPS in fights, but at the same time, I'm not really criticizing the open world gameplay the same way I would, 1v1 fighting, because
Exactly.
Obviously that's the core of Street Fighter. That's what people play for, and that performs 60 FPS, no hitches, beautiful presentation. I really don't have a whole lot of complaints here. In fact, there was a time where I was trying to put together a review for this, and I captured a lot of footage for it and did some frame rate analysis and everything. And I was impressed by just how nice the cutscenes in World Tour mode look. Like, when you meet a new master, they always play like an introductory cutscene, and you could be fooled into thinking that those aren't, that those are pre-rendered, but your character outfit and all is in all of those. And so there's clearly at least a degree of real-time rendering going on in there. And the lighting, the presentation, all of it looks really, really good. Street Fighter 6 for me, it's not again, like we kind of mentioned, it's not the best version of the game, but it is a portable version of the game that is absolutely competent at what it sets out to do. I would give this one an 8.5.
Yeah, I remember back when the 3DS launched, my primary game then was Street Fighter 4 3D Edition. And that was a very good version, but it had a lot of compromises, like the backgrounds didn't move. And this time, this is just raw Street Fighter 6. There's no real compromises. And I've been playing online a lot, so just with randoms. It's cross-platform, so you can play against like PlayStation and Steam users and Xbox. And it holds up really, really well. I'm finding games immediately, and the actual quality of them, like you were saying, is really good. When you're playing on a big 4K TV, you can see a bit of blur, but playing in handheld mode, I think this looks terrific. And the Pro Controller 2 is also really nice for this game. I've nothing really bad to say about it. It's just kind of an easy comfort one. So I think your score is very appropriate.
Yeah, pointing out the online, because I see people in the live audience mentioning it. Fantastic. Absolutely rock solid online on this game. The only thing that I would say that's even remotely negative is that they added Joy-Con like motion control as an option.
I've not checked those out.
Yeah, it is I would call it, like baby mode. It's literally you just shake a Joy-Con and stuff happens. And if you have really young kids who want to play with you, that is certainly a way to let them play, but I don't think anybody is really going to find that that's their preferred input method.
No. It is also one of the few Switch 2 games that use the 120Hz display, kinda. It's not 120 FPS, they use it for latency, but you get some use out of that, even if it doesn't really count.
Yeah, it definitely reduces input latency, and I could feel it. There's another game where we'll talk about 120 FPS where it does make a massive difference for me. So I'll save my comments for there. But I learned about 75% of the way through writing a review for this game that I had to throw a lot of my comments out because 120 FPS wasn't working right. But that's not an issue with the game.
Well, let's go straight onto that then. So is this Cyberpunk?
It is, yes.
Okay, all right. Yeah. Well, you go ahead with your comments then. So what's the 120 FPS, 120 hertz mode entail here?
Right. So Cyberpunk basically runs in a 120 FPS container the same way Street Fighter does, and it is meant not to actually produce a 120 FPS presentation for the game, but to lower your input latency. It's kind of like baby VRR in a way. Like, it just helps you get a bit more of a performant responsive feeling from the game itself by putting it in that 120 FPS container despite rendering at maybe 30, 40, somewhere sub 60. And what I discovered, because in my house we game on LG TVs, and what we discovered was that LG introduced a bug in the firmware of their TVs. So if you out there play Switch 2 on an LG TV, any kind, doesn't have to be OLED, just any LG TV, and you have 120 FPS support on that TV, the Switch 2 very likely isn't actually getting 120 FPS. What's happening is the TV is telling the Switch 2 that it's outputting at 120, but the TV's refresh rate is not changing, and it's staying at 60 hertz.
Yeah.
Which I only learned through playing Welcome Tour and being completely unable to distinguish between 60 and 120, because there was no visual difference to me. And then, doing a little diagnostic on my TV to discover that, in fact, the output was capped at 60 hertz, and then doing some sleuthing to find out that you had to disable HDR and enable 120 hertz in the system menu to get 120 to work. And Cyberpunk, unfortunately, is a game that really you want to have both of those things going at the same time.
Yeah, how odd. It's also a big benefit for the handheld screen, which is 120 hertz as well. You can do 40 FPS very easily. Of course, that's VRR, but 40 is very easily divisible between 120, which it wouldn't fit into 60 hertz quite so well. So it's great for that. But I was messing around with Cyberpunk earlier with mouse controls. There's also gyro in there. I think they could have done a better job of the mouse controls, because they haven't really remapped the buttons at all. So you're using the Y button a lot to activate things. You can remap, but it's a big reach to. Like, imagine you're holding your Joy-Con like a mouse right now. You have to really reach to get that Y button. And I wish they'd make that a bit easier. And it also isn't one of those games where you can change your controls on the fly. So if you're in mouse mode, you can't just take it to regular Joy-Cons while driving. You've got to go back into the options and change that. So I wish they made that stuff more flexible.
Yeah, I did a mouse control showcase a couple days after the console came out, and people were like, "Oh, you're struggling so much," and I was like, "It's hard to play this game that way." Mouse control mode, I don't necessarily love the implementation of. I like the idea, but not the execution. And I think that Cyberpunk overall, I like the gyro in it. I didn't actually use that in my playthrough on PS5, or on PC. I didn't really have the option to use that. But one of the things that I think it's interesting because I count Cyberpunk as a technical showcase for any piece of hardware. It is basically our generation's Crisis. And it's something interesting to see that this runs at all. But the thing that I found most amusing is that it's also, there's an interesting kind of split, right? So Cyberpunk is comprised of two components. It's comprised of the base game that released in 2020, and then there's the Phantom Liberty DLC, which released in 2023 and was for current gen consoles only. And there is a vast performance difference between those two on Switch 2.
Mm-hmm. I'm pretty much ignoring Phantom Liberty because it doesn't run very well. But I'm happy with that, though, because the base Cyberpunk is so big as it is. It's actually a game I didn't play originally, so this is my first time playing through it. And I'm pretty content to pretend Phantom Liberty doesn't exist. but maybe when I finish it, I'll give it a go. But I have seen the results, and it's not very pretty.
Yeah, so I did some FPS analysis on both of these, and in the open world in Cyberpunk, like the base Cyberpunk, you get a pretty solid 30 FPS presentation.
Yeah, it runs fine in base Cyberpunk. Yeah.
It was funny because there is cross progression, and so the first thing I did, I've got my physical copy right here actually for some reason.
And this is one of the few games that has like a proper physical all on the cartridge.
I bought this just because I was like, you know what, I want to support this, so I grabbed this on launch night, and while everyone was downloading Mario Kart, I was playing that, and I loaded up my save, which obviously because I played years ago is in Phantom Liberty, and I was immediately kind of bummed out because I was like, oh, this does not look or run particularly well. That's a disappointing showing. And I put the game on the shelf for a while because we had so many other things to do. And when I finally had the time to circle back around to it and start thinking about prepping coverage for it, I decided that it would only be fair to start a new save. And when I started a new save, I was blown away by how nice the Switch 2 runs the base game. And I have to say it's really, really impressive stuff. Like it gives you that feeling of, you've got this impossibly powerful little tablet in your hands, particularly when you play this game in handheld mode, that you're just like, how does this work? I know this is a 5-year-old game. I know that, people are going to say, it should run, but if you put this on a Steam Deck and play the Steam Deck version of this game, the comparison is just embarrassingly bad for Steam Deck. Switch 2 just beats the pants off this thing left, right, and center. So I'm really pleased with what I've seen here so far.
Yeah, in terms of battery life too, like the Switch 2's battery life isn't remarkable, but it's better than Steam Deck's for running Cyberpunk. And I see it compared to PS4 and Xbox One a lot. They ran worse. They ran a lot worse than this. They weren't, when you put them side by side visually, they are quite comparable at times, but you start driving around an Xbox One, it is far worse than Switch 2 is. So this is definitely a pretty comparable experience, and playing it on a handheld is just nuts. I remember taking out the dock for the first time and just playing it on that tablet. I was blown away. This is the showcase Switch 2 game right now. But I haven't played enough of it to give it a score, so I guess that's in your hands.
Yeah, so I struggled with this one because, again, like so many other games, the cuts are apparent to get it to work on the Nintendo Switch 2. Phantom Liberty is also, a chunk of the game that doesn't really perform very well, which is unfortunate because I think for some people that may be the draw. But philosophically, I had to figure out how I view this and what the use case is, and it's one of those reviews where, were this a full review video, I would give many caveats to my score. But basically, I think there are gonna be two types of Cyberpunk players on Switch 2. There are gonna be the people like you, John, who are coming in new, who didn't play it on PlayStation or PC or Xbox, who are just playing this for the very first time. And I think that they're gonna have kind of a mixed view of it, because the base game is beautiful and runs well, but then they're eventually going to make their way to Dogtown, and they're going to see a precipitous drop in performance and visual quality. And that is kind of an unfortunate thing. The second group of players are going to be people like me who have played it on other platforms and are really using this as a way to continue their playthrough in a portable form factor. And I think those folks, weirdly, are going to be more forgiving because we've all played it on something much more powerful, and now we're moving it to a very small handheld device, where the expectation, the bar may be a bit lower for us. I certainly am willing to play Phantom Liberty, and just say, okay, well, when it's time to play this on a TV, I'll just port my save back over to another platform and continue playing that way rather than docking my Switch 2. So I'm going to give this one an 8, just a flat 8, because I do think that the Phantom Liberty performance issues drag it down. The poor implementation of mouse mode is something that I'd love to see fixed. But overall, this is Switch's greatest technical showcase, so it's weird to give it a lower score than, say, something like Mario Kart World, but I think it has more significant issues than that game.
Okay. Well, let's go on to the opposing side of Switch 2's maybe its worst technical showcase with Hitman World of Assassination. I've been playing this primarily undocked. I played it docked a little bit. And in undocked, you can notice drops every now and then, but VRR does save this a bit. And it's quite pleasant, I will say. Playing Hitman as a portable game is a really nice experience. However, it's also got its negatives there as well. So this game relies heavily on its online servers. So you can play it offline, but you won't actually get rewards like new items if you finish it offline. So you've got to be connected to the internet to really get your worth out of Hitman, which is bizarre. You'd think they would have changed that. But I have been enjoying it, though. I've been really enjoying playing in handheld mode. But playing docked, it is a technical mess.
Yeah, so Hitman is... I can't really say what I would have used for the tagline for a review for this game, but it had Hitman with one extra letter in it. So I feel like IOI and must have been really counting on docked VRR being a thing when they developed this port, because the frame rate exists in a space where VRR would absolutely smooth it out, for the most part on a compatible display. And like you said, docked mode kind of bears that out, right? Handheld mode bears that out. Handheld mode is the ideal way to play this game because it performs like an absolute mess in docked mode, which is unfortunate. With most Nintendo console launches, I try to pick up a game from an IP I've never messed with before. With the Wii U, it was Call of Duty. I'm sure I picked up something that wasn't Breath of the Wild with the Switch. And with this, it was Hitman. I had seen it, and a couple days after the console came out, I was like, you know what? I'm gonna try it. And it's a shame that it performs the way it does, because it's underneath all of the performance issues, it's quite fun. Like, it's a really fun game. The freedom of being able to take out your target however you want is very satisfying. There's a training mission at the very beginning of the game that teaches you kind of the ins and outs, and then they set you loose in that same mission a second time, saying, this time you've got no rails, no direction.
Just don't do that again. Do it a different way. Yeah, exactly.
And so, I kind of did one run through the mission and explored what everyone was doing, right? Like, I Majora's Masked it. I just watched what all the NPCs did, and then I picked one that I was like, this guy is going to be my angle for getting to the target. I'm going to try to knock this guy out and impersonate him, and then get my target that way. And sure enough, I was completely able to do that. I poisoned his drink. It made him sick. He went to the bathroom. I knocked him out. I hid his body, put his clothes on, and then got alone in a room with my target and did what I was supposed to do, right? I killed him. And so that part of the game is almost intoxicating. Like, I love the idea of it, the concept of it. But when you look at a game, and I'll put some frame rate analysis footage up here so you can understand. Rotating the camera kills this game.
It does.
It's
such a shame too, because it's beautiful. I think the second or third level of Hitman 1 is in Italy, and it's this really wide open sandbox area. You can go through the town, go to these shops, and then you go inside, and there's just these crowds of people. And that's a big part of this game technically too, is there's massive crowds. And seeing that on a handheld screen, it really was a wow moment. And this has been my go-to just downtime game. I've played all of Hitman 1 via this. I'm on Hitman 2 at the moment. I know the point is to go back and play them how you want, but I'm making my way through all of them so far. And I'm really enjoying it. I just wish it performed better docked. I wish it performed better undocked too, but at least it's a bit... there's a crutch there at the very least.
Yeah, it's a game that... It's hard because I don't want to be mean to this game because I really do enjoy the gameplay. So much so that, like you said, John, when I have downtime, I look past the technical issues and play it anyway. But it is one of the only Switch 2 launch games where while I'm playing it, I think, man, I really wish I bought this somewhere else. Somewhere that it performs better. Because I really enjoy what I'm doing. I just wish I wasn't constantly thinking about frame drops and hitches. And like you said, handheld mode smooths some of that out, but it's still apparent that it's there. That really, it's one of those games where VRR is papering over a lot of issues.
Yeah. I think I love it enough as a portable game not to say don't buy this, because I think there is still a lot of love in there. And I've been enjoying it a lot, but we also can't reward the technical problems. There should be a 30 FPS cap, or ideally it should just be a rock solid 60 with compromises somewhere else. Because it doesn't feel like they've really compromised the visuals anywhere, and maybe they should have done something to make it just run well. Hopefully that comes down the line, but we've got to assess it as it is right now. I'm struggling to give it a score because I really do enjoy this, but there's a big problem here, though.
Yeah, it's tough for me because I know two of our lower scores, and both of those games perform better than this one.
True.
So I would say, though, and maybe this is going to make some people mad, I would probably put this at like a 7, because I think that with a patch, it would be an 8, maybe even an 8.5. But I feel like the technical issues take it down, enough to where I'm with you that if you have a Switch 2 and that's all you have, and you're willing to play this strictly in handheld mode, I think you'll have a lot of fun. If you are a primarily docked player, though, this is going to be a miserable experience for you.
I think 7's fine. I wouldn't go any higher than 7, to be honest. I think the game itself, excellent, but we've got to assess the Switch 2 version here, which... It's fine in some instances, being handheld mode. Still could be better, but if this were just a flawless port, this might even be a 9. But yeah, as it is, 7. All right. Well, let's keep on going then. Let's go with something that is definitely not a technical showcase whatsoever, because it looks identical to how it looked on the 3DS, being Bravely Default HD Remaster, and. This is a hard one to assess because the game is excellent. The price is pretty good. It's a budget price game. The mouse stuff, also very good. Great mouse mini games in there. But then you look at the game itself, and it's barely been changed. It looks so similar. They haven't really redone anything. They have made the audio quality less crunchy, so they're less compressed in that area. That's fantastic. But there's also a pretty bad use of AI upscaling in the towns. And the towns were a highlight on 3DS. They looked beautiful on that screen, and putting them in 3D was even more beautiful. But now you look at a gate, and it's just, you can see where the pixels have gone missing because of their upscaler. So it's a strange one to assess because the game's great, but the remaster not so much.
Yeah, it's weird because I feel like, I played this, I've only played this in docked mode because mouse mode controls, in the mini games, they're a little more pleasing to me on a bigger screen. But
yeah.
I played the game proper, last night for a bit to kind of refresh my memory. And I remember just kind of looking at it and I was like, man, the towns in particular look pretty blurry, very muddy. It loses a lot of charm taken up to the big screen that way. And I think that this was probably designed again with the idea that Square Enix probably thought like, oh, people are going to play this handheld mode. Not me. I'm going to play this on my TV. And it doesn't hold up super well. The models, obviously they have a distinctive charm to them. They're meant to be evocative of 90s RPGs, and that they're small, they're chibi models. And things that were visual showcases on the 3DS don't quite hit the same on the Switch 2. The opening sequence, where you're able to zoom in and around the character model, like a full scale version. It was
AR. Should just live in your room, and now it's just this black void that she's speaking into.
Yeah, exactly. It's not as impressive as it was, and no. I think that they could have done some stuff to maybe make it feel a bit more the way it was intended to hit back then. But ultimately, this is a game that I still really enjoy. I love the core gameplay. The story's really good. It's just it's difficult because obviously Square Enix knows this isn't meant to be like a showcase for the Switch 2. They're not trying to make it a showcase for the Switch 2. And it's certainly not going to be a standout launch title. But what is there is fun. You know, I was in combat and I was able to summon you and have you attack for me. And I mean, while that was something that was present in the 3DS, it's not something we're going to see a lot of in this day and age on Switch 2. And I'm glad that we have this game as kind of almost a time capsule of sorts.
Yeah, I mean, it deserves to live on. It's an odd launch title, but it deserves to live on. To its benefit, 3DS was 30 FPS. This is 60 now. That's a pretty nice bump. The load times are faster as well over 3DS. Also a nice bump. And in general, there are no real new features. 3DS had a 0% encounter toggle. That's in here, but you've got to unlock it in the new mini-games, which are good. And if you're someone who kind of wants to use the Switch 2 mouse in a way that isn't just for first-person aiming or clicking, this is a great way to do that, because there's simultaneous mouse play where you're dual-wielding both mice. And that's an experience no one's had before, because no PC games do that. And genuinely, it's fantastic.
Yeah, that game is my favorite single use of mouse mode out of the entire library at the moment. Just kind of moving around two mice and you know, controlling different things. Like it'll have you like pull a lever on the right hand side and flip some switches on the left, and at the end there's a combat encounter that, you know, kind of evokes a bit of Mario Paint, which is just really neat. So I really enjoy that game.
Yeah. So what number are you feeling for Bravely Default then?
This one is tough because, like you said, it has minimal additions to the base game on 3DS. It's not really doing anything new or exciting, save for those mouse mode minigames, but it is a solidly fun game. I would probably put this one at an 8. I think it's good, but not really remarkable.
Yeah, as a port, I'd say so, or remaster. But the game itself is one of the best 3DS games, and if you missed out, want to play it again, I think you should. So solid 8. Wish the towns looked nicer, but yeah, that's the big negative there. Okay, let's move on to No Man's Sky, Switch 2 edition, kind of a surprise one. And I think this is actually the biggest upgrade of any Switch 2 edition game. Because No Man's Sky on Switch 1 was really remarkable that it worked. looked pretty bad, and ran really poorly. But to be able to squeeze in open world planet hopping onto a Switch 1 with all the gameplay features intact, impressive. But now they've just made it not really compromised. Looks like the PlayStation 4 version, looks beautiful, runs nice in handheld mode. There's a 40 FPS mode as well. Yeah, I think this is just a really good port. There's not much really to say about this one. It's just uncompromised No Man's Sky.
Yeah, this is something No Man's Sky needed. This is a game that I've followed since, you know, its disastrous PS4 launch many years ago. Another game on this list that was famously really bad when it came out and got better over time. I didn't think we'd see this. I thought that, you know, the Switch port of this game was kind of just a throwaway, like, here, it's on Switch, you know, lots of people play stuff on Switch, so we'll put this on here. And realistically, that's what it was for the longest. It was a terrible port that was kind of there to fill a gap. And Hello Games really impressed me here. This is a dramatic improvement. I would say the only other game that comes close to this in terms of leap in visual fidelity and performance is Fortnite. And
true, yeah.
Those are both games that were famously terrible on the original Switch, and have both come into their own on this new hardware. And yeah, I'd have to say, you know, they did a great job here. It brings it much closer to parity with, you know, other competing platforms, more modern presentation, but you get that benefit of portability, which is just so huge for a game like this.
My heart's saying 8.5 for this one. Very nice portable game. The patch is free, so it's not a paid Switch 2 edition, even though they've overhauled the entire game. The effort they put in is like a 9, but I think the way I feel about the game itself, I'd lean towards 8.5.
Yeah, 8.5 seems perfectly reasonable. It's a very solid port, you know, and this is, yeah, it's one of the biggest improvements we'll have on this list today.
Well, so you mentioned Fortnite. Let's just lean straight into Fortnite. Free game. They patched it for Switch 2 on launch day, but then they added mouse support like 2 or 3 days later for some reason.
Yeah.
But it is transformative. We've got a comparison on the channel. The exact same person playing, one spectating, one playing. So you're seeing the exact same thing. And it is night and day.
Yeah, Fortnite famously bad on Switch 1. Skins wouldn't load fully all the time. Details would pop in at a very close distance. Frame rate was garbage. I've played, I think, maybe 600 hours of Fortnite, and it's a game I'm deeply familiar with. The Switch 2 version is finally able to compete on par with PlayStation and Xbox and PC. And it has its own benefits because, like you said, John, there's mouse control, but also motion control in the Switch 2 version feels far better than that on PlayStation, in my opinion. I've been using gyro for years in Fortnite, and I find the Switch 2's implementation of gyro to be way more comfortable and easy to use than even the PlayStation version. We played the new Blitz mode that just came out, and again, that is a version of Fortnite that is meant to be more condensed, faster, in and out kind of gameplay, and that performs admirably on the Switch as well. Obviously, there are some features that other platforms have that Switch 2 can't quite hit, like 120 FPS gameplay. Not a thing on Switch 2, unfortunately. But visually it keeps up. It finally has replays. It feels like a much more full-fledged version of the game than what you get on the original Switch hardware.
So it's basically current gen minus 120 FPS. It's portable. It's what you could ask for, and it's free. So it's there's no price or value proposition here. I think it's just kind of a flat, easy thumbs up for this one. Putting a score's a bit harder, but no negatives really.
I would actually drop this to an 8, and there's only one reason for that. It could be an 8.5 or a 9. It's a huge improvement, but there is one major thing that's still missing from the Switch 2 version that's on every other version, save for mobile, and that's Save the World. The single player mode where you build your own fort. The reason Fortnite is called Fortnite is not present on Switch 2, and the fact that they can do replays and everything else tells me that it just feels like Epic didn't want to do it, and that to me is a pretty huge bummer, considering a lot of folks who play Fortnite, who are very old players like me, paid for that. So you can't get the one version of Fortnite that's paid on Switch 2.
Yeah. All right, let's stick with an 8 for that then. Puyo Tetris 2S, I gave a 5. And I love this game. I think this is one of the best puzzle games out there. And the reason we gave it a 5 is because, one, there's no upgrade path, which is part of the problem, because also the online pool is totally different. And so Switch 1, still incredibly active today, especially in Japan. You'll find an online match basically anytime you search for one. Switch 2, I have found one online match in my entire time playing it. People just are not playing. People have stuck with the first game. Because why would they upgrade? There's no real reason to. It looks the same, basically. If you zoom into the background, you can see a little bit less aliasing. Doesn't matter for a puzzle game. And the only real benefits are some of the Switch 2 modes. So you can put your camera on there. Not all cameras work for some reason, and only the Switch 2 camera seems to, which is opposed to every other Switch 2 game. You can move around with the mouse if you want to. It's not as good as the D-pad. I like that you can point when someone else is playing. So if someone's playing with a controller, you can use the mouse to say, hey, why don't you go here? That's kind of cool. And the other Switch 2 exclusive thing is being able to have 2 people playing on the same board, which is something I think like Puyo 20th anniversary did. So it's a returning feature, but it's something the base game doesn't have. Other than that, same game. No real differences at all. Only that the online pool is exclusive to Switch 2 players.
Yeah, I own, and obviously I'm not the expert on Puyo the same way you are, but I do own both 2 and 2S, and I think Sega made some incredibly baffling and frankly disappointing decisions around how they handled the launch of the Switch 2. Some very unfriendly moves for consumers with regard to how they would price and make these games available. This is exactly the type of game where you want to move the community from one platform to another, not splinter them. And so, yeah, I think this is absolutely, a 5. It doesn't add enough. It doesn't change enough. The features that are there that are new don't warrant an entirely new purchase. And just kind of a bummer all around that this is the way they chose to go, because I think even if they had marketed this as a $5 or even $10 upgrade pack, it would have been a lot more palatable.
Yeah. The only saving grace is game share, which is that's cool, but it's not a good enough reason to spend full price on this game, or full price to what the game is. It's not a $60 game; it's like $40. But the Switch One version is definitely not $40. That's like bargain bin price, and it's backwards compatible, pretty much the exact same. There's no real reason to get Switch 2 over Switch 1 unless you really want that mouse stuff. But it's not the most remarkable mouse showcase, so there's very little reason to go that route. So let's just move on from this, because I don't like talking about it. So let's instead talk about Arcade Archives 2 Ridge Racer, which Ash reviewed.
Yeah, it's interesting. Ridge Racer, weirdly enough, I don't associate it whatsoever with Nintendo consoles because I'm old enough to remember when it was PlayStation exclusive. But I also played Ridge Racer on 3DS when that came out. So, not a ton to say here. It's an Arcade Archives game, which means it is a remarkably accurate port of an arcade game. It looks and performs the way I remember it, at least. And yeah, I think it's what did Ash give it, an 8 or a 9?
I'm just looking this up right now. I watched his review yesterday and I can't remember the number. I will say Arcade Archives 2 is it's around twice the price of Arcade Archives 1. And this game in particular doesn't really use those features. Ash gave it an 8. So Arcade Archives 2 can have online play for these arcade games, which is fantastic. Ridge Racer 1 is not a multiplayer game, so it doesn't utilize that. So what you instead get is just a raw port of the arcade game with no real new features. The Switch 2 in handheld mode does have VRR, which is cool because it can mimic how the original CRT would refresh itself in handheld mode, so you're sticking to those original frame rates. That's really cool. But otherwise, it's quite a lot of money for a pretty basic package.
Yeah, I do have an issue there in terms of, pricing is usually something I don't factor into reviews because money is a sticky thing. Sure. What may break the bank for us may be nothing to someone else. But I will say that I feel like games like this, just straight up arcade ports with minimal refinement or improvement, should never be more than a few dollars.
Yeah. But if you're a big Ridge Racer fan, it's been years since the last one. I think the last one was the Vita game, and since then we've had nothing. And even then, the last time we had a peak Ridge Racer would be PS3 at this point. So very long time. It's nice to see the series back, but I would have hoped to see something a bit grander than this. But still, I'm happy. And Ash gave it an 8. Let's stick with an 8.
Sounds good to me.
All right. Hopefully we get a lot more Arcade Archive Namco games. I just saw Shell Shock say Time Crisis and Point Blank. I'd love those with mouse controls, absolutely.
Yes.
But let's go on to Yakuza 0 Director's Cut, which I was just playing around with. Sega said it was 4K. It's not 4K.
Yeah.
If you look in the distance, stairs are the dead giveaway all the time. Look at the stairs. There's pixels shimmering. That said, still looks nice. Runs at 60 FPS. The close-ups on the models, they got very detailed paws. Looks great. This was a PlayStation 3 game though, so I don't want to give it too much praise for looking great. It stood the test of time really well, and it's based on the PS4 version, so it's better than it was in PS3. But it's held up well. But I wouldn't say this is a remarkable tech showcase.
Right. One of the reasons I picked this up was because Sega told me at the Switch 2 premiere event that it was 4K 60 FPS, and it was the only game I knew of that was claiming that. And like you, John, I picked it up and I played it, and I immediately was like, it might say 4K, but it's not 4K. It's not rendering at 4K, not even close. I would not be surprised if this was 1080p blown up to 4K, and I want to be clear that I do mean blown up to 4K, not upscaled, not like DLSS. Because there are things that should look a lot sharper than they do. You and I were talking about this before we hit record, but one of the hallmarks of the Yakuza series is when you enter a new chapter, the title of that chapter is massively put on the screen.
Yeah.
And those are blurry. Like they're very, like somebody took a JPEG and like just increased the size 200%. So there's something there that's just not quite right.
No.
It's not running at native 4K.
Yeah, play in handheld mode though, great fit to 1080p, just fits that display really well. And this, it is a pretty substantial change to Yakuza 0. There's a dub for the first time, and they've done a pretty good job making it feel like a natural thing that was always there. There's like, I think they says like 20-something minutes of new cutscenes, but I haven't seen any of that stuff yet. But there's also an online mode, which I struggled to find players in. But you can basically play as like 50 characters from across the Yakuza series and just do online brawls together. And that's a brand new thing that Yakuza's never had. So if you've played Yakuza 0, there is some pretty substantially different content in here. And if you haven't, you get a huge game, especially for a launch game. But it's not exactly like the biggest must-have game if you've already played Yakuza 0. There's only a few relatively small things sprinkled out.
Yeah, as somebody who has previously finished Yakuza 0, and in fact recently on PlayStation, I didn't really, like, I started playing it and I was like, I just don't really feel the need to play this again. Not right now. I've played through like the first bit of the first chapter and I was like, it looks nice, it runs nice. It's not appreciably better, but also importantly not appreciably worse than how it performed on PS4 Pro. I just really felt like I was playing the same game with a different controller in my hand.
Right. And it's a nice portable game. The Yakuza formula is great for portability. And Switch 1 had Kiwami, the first game remake, and that didn't run particularly well. So it's just nice to have uncompromised Yakuza 0, 60 FPS, 1080p in handheld mode. So I'd definitely recommend it on that front. But it also is just kind of Yakuza 0 again, though, which isn't a bad thing.
No, great game. Just not a groundbreaking port. I would probably put this one at again, because there's nothing really wrong with it. I'd put it at an 8. I think it's a great game. If you haven't played it, I recommend it. But if you have, you don't need to double dip here.
Yeah, I was thinking the exact same thing. Terrific game. Best way to start with Yakuza. Just a really nice entry point. And I imagine Switch 2 is probably going to get a whole lot more, because they shoved a whole lot at Xbox in a very small window. So I imagine the Switch 2 is just going to start getting basically everything else. So if you want to get into Yakuza now, this would be a good time to do so. So yeah, nice solid 8. Let's move on, though, to our next game, which is going to be Fast Fusion. Brandon reviewed this one. I'm going to check out his score a moment, which I also watched. I'm not good at memorizing numbers today, apparently. But what are your raw thoughts on Fast Fusion?
So Fast Fusion is Shinen are amazing for the record.
Incredible. Yeah.
They just, I don't know who they have programming for them, but they're incredible. But there are some issues with this game. I think that its core gameplay is really nice. It lives up to its name. It's fast. It is beautiful. It looks amazing in motion. I think it renders at 1440p. But I think they just released the Pure update, which I think
they did. I tested
puts
this
it
out.
At native 1440p.
Native 1440p, no upscaling, no anti-aliasing either. But
yeah,
it looks a lot better. DLSS was a problem with this game. So this is a very fast-paced game, and you can see the image breakup very clearly. It's not the sort of thing you have to pause to see. You can see it breaking up, and it's a shame because it's beautiful otherwise. But playing in this new pure form, I think it looks a whole lot better, and it's a really nice technical showcase of Switch 2. They're also planning to patch it with 120 Hz, which will be great, because nothing really runs at that at 120 FPS, so that'll be a nice showcase then, but it doesn't currently do that.
Yeah, and a game that fast-paced at 120 FPS, it would be a showcase for the Switch's capability to do that. But as Game Bear mentions in our live audience, there's no online, and for a racing game, is particularly in 2025, that's kind of a huge letdown.
It is. Yeah, Brandon gave it an 8.5, by the way. And yeah, no online is a big sticking point because Fast Racing Neo, Fast RMX, they both had online. I played it a lot online. In later years, people weren't playing so much, but it was very easy to set up with friends. And they kind of replaced that with Game Share, which it's a cool feature to have, but it's not a replacement to pure online. So that's a big shame. It also has less tracks than RMX, although they did add another cup today with 3 new ones. So I imagine over time it will have more. Right now it's just shy with that new update. The fusion mechanic's cool. You can just merge any 2 cars together and make a brand new one. And there's 300 different cars you can make. So it's very ambitious. I like the jump button too. That's a nice addition to the formula. It's a nice game. I feel like the lack of online really drags it down.
Yeah, lack of online, and it's worth mentioning that Game Share, and this is not a knock against Fast specifically, but it is one of the worst games to play on Game Share because of how fast-paced it is, and because Game Share, unfortunately, is not really the type of service you'd want to use for really twitchy, very, reflex-focused games. The stream quality, while good, is not good enough. I played it with both Brandon and Ash, and I've been both the host and the person on the other end of the Game Share. And as the host, it's fine, because you're just playing your local copy of the game in a slightly smaller window. But when you're on the other side, the receiving person on Game Share, it is difficult to parse what's going on. The image breaks up really, really badly over Game Share.
Yeah. I think I might have gone a little bit lower than Brandon. I admire the game. I think the tech is remarkable. But I feel like not having online is just such a big knock against it. But 8.5, we'll stick with that. So yeah, let's go straight on to a game I have but haven't played because I've taken it off my storage multiple times at this point because it's so freaking big. And that is Split Fiction. I got a cheap code on this, and it's 70 gigabytes. And so I've been planning to play it with my wife some evening, but other games keep coming out that I'm interested in. So I've removed this 4 times now because it takes up so much storage. But I know you've played this a bit, Steve, so how are you feeling about Split Fiction?
I don't like this game.
Oh, man.
There are very... So to be clear, and I don't think that's a Switch 2 specific gripe, I just don't like this game no matter what platform it's on. I'm a big fan of the developers. I like A Way Out. I like It Takes Two. I think Split Fiction is quite boring. And,
wow.
I was really disappointed by how much I didn't like this. So, Split Fiction is a great idea in concept, and I love that they make it easy for a second player to play with you, whether it's local, split screen co-op, which is obviously the default way of playing this game. You can't play it any other way. But you can also, they make it so if you own this game, you can play it with a friend on another platform and they don't have to own the game. You can, of course, do that also through Game Chat or through Game Share on Switch 2. But realistically, this game at its core is just holding the left stick in a direction and pushing a single button. It feels like that's all you're doing for most of the time.
That doesn't sound John-coded.
Yeah, no, you basically have lots of cool visual effects happening around you, but at the end of the day, it's move towards this and push A. Oh, maybe you have to push Y this one time. It feels... I tend to, even with the most boring games that I play, I can find something. My wife and I both fell asleep playing this multiple times. We would be playing it and we would just get so bored, during a cutscene that we'd fall asleep. And
it's a real shame to hear. This is some people's game of the year, so I am still interested to play this myself. But I guess how's the Switch 2 port though? How have they done
the Switch 2 port has some very obvious cuts made to the visuals to get it to function and stay at a solid frame rate. If you put it side by side with PS5, you'll notice. I think maybe they went a bit deeper than they needed to with the cuts. Characters look a bit blurry, environments look a bit muddy. It feels like the same type of visual cuts that we saw in Switch 1 games to get them to work. And I think maybe they just went a bit too aggressive with their reduction in visual fidelity to keep it at a solid 60 FPS. it feels like it's a bit muddier than it needs to be. And it's a game that certainly I would want to play. Like in handheld mode, I'm sure it looks fine, but this is also like a split screen game already.
This isn't
so
something you'd
I'd
really
want to
play
it
handheld mode, is it?
Yeah, I wouldn't recommend it in handheld mode. So honestly, I'd give this one a 5. It's a game that I don't love to begin with, and it's the worst version of a game I don't love.
Man, okay. Well, let's move on to another game. This is one that you've played that I haven't. That's Kunitsu-Gami, Path of the Goddess. And I've been interested in this, because this is another pretty cool mouse showcase game. So how are you feeling about this one?
Kunitsu-Gami is one of the most unique games I've played in a really long time. So basically, I feel like probably almost nobody watching this has played this game. So I'll explain what it is. You are a warrior that is tasked with helping like a priestess, right? Like you have to protect a priestess, and it's there's 2 distinct modes to the game. There's a very normal like third person action mode in which you just fight off monsters. You know, you run around, you kill monsters. No mouse control in this bit. You could use mouse control, but it would strictly be moving the camera around. Shoulder buttons control your attack, so it is comfortable at least to play if you want to use mouse mode for the entirety of the game. But where it becomes really unique is that once you've defeated said monsters, the priestess has to make her way towards a goal at the other end of the environment, whether that's a village or some other place. You have to do stuff to help her make her way over there. So occasionally monsters may appear, you have to kill them, but you also have to help villagers do things. Like you may have to say, hey, I need you to cut wood or whatever. And it becomes almost RTS like in those moments where the mouse control really makes a lot of sense, because you can move quickly through the environment, select a villager, give them a task, point them quite literally where to go, and continue on with that. And as they gather resources, that makes you able to quite literally build the path for the goddess to purify that area. I've never played anything like it, and I really enjoy it. I think it is one of the most unique games that I've played just wholesale in a very long time, and it is, because of mouse control, quite uniquely well suited to the Switch 2, right? Because I don't know that I'd want to play this on PlayStation or anywhere else, because the mouse control is so good and so vital to making this game feel the way it was clearly designed to be played, that it would just feel wrong to use a controller to move around units and stuff like that. Like the same reason I wouldn't play, say, Command and Conquer or old Warcraft on a console. Switch 2 absolves that. So this one's really, really solid for me. I think it's a game that no one is going to play, and that years from now people are going to call a hidden gem of the Switch 2 launch lineup. I would give this one, I'd put it at an 8.5.
Yeah, and there's even benefits over PC. Like you can plug a controller in and switch to your mouse, but then you're changing what you're playing with depending on the scenario, which isn't seamless. Switch 2 though, you're playing like regular split Joy-Con, just like a regular game. Put one down, you're suddenly mouse controls. That's what I wanted from Cyberpunk, but I'm just doing it on the fly. And I think that makes it better than basically any other platform you can play this on. So I'm so genuinely interested to play this myself, but I'm glad to hear it pulls it off.
Yeah, the versatility of the mouse controls here is really key to making the game. It's a seamless transition, which for some reason isn't the standard on every game. But both Fortnite and Cyberpunk require you to enable and disable it, which makes zero sense. But I'm glad that Capcom nailed how to do mouse control for this.
Yeah. Well, let's do some Switch 2 editions. We'll do Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. I think we can bundle them together. Brandon did for his review. I believe he gave them 9s. And it's interesting, these two, because Nintendo did 10, or technically 12, free content updates for regular Switch 1 games, which gave them very similar boosts. They all basically became 1440p, 60 FPS. And in the case of Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, that's the most dramatic jump any Nintendo games had. Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, going from 30 FPS, 900p to 1440p, 60 FPS. It's big. But it also begs the question of what makes this different to all the free patches, and Zelda Notes is really the only answer to that. So there's a bit of a value question here, but the games themselves, brilliant.
Yeah, Zelda Notes is something interesting. So I would say that I've been playing more Breath of the Wild than anything else lately. I wanted to play through all of Breath of the Wild, finish it, then go into Tears of the Kingdom and do the same. But I haven't used Zelda Notes. Like, I have almost zero interest in having my phone out next to me while I'm playing a game. And I think that's where it falls apart for me, because I'm not sending items. I'm not listening to Zelda tell me anything. I'm not using it to look for Koroks. I'm just kind of playing this game that I love at a much higher frame rate with much higher with much better visuals, or at least mostly better visuals. Because one thing I did want to call out, and it is weird, I feel like some things, I feel like the higher resolution, the higher frame rate exposes some issues that were present in the game that I maybe ignored previously, like pop in at distance. You know, it feels much more easy to spot now.
Sure.
You know, I'll see structures just appear and I'm like, I don't remember that. But, you know, then I go back and check and I'm like, oh, it did happen. I guess I just didn't notice. But I was in the Forgotten Temple and I noticed that the entire texture that they use in that place is just really weird on Switch 2. Like, as you move the camera, you see the texture kind of shift and shimmer in a way that I suspect is DLSS having an issue with that texture.
I'll say the color mapping is a bit different too, even in identical time of day. They've given this less of a blue hue, which you can take it or leave it. I think I'm too familiar with the original, so I kind of miss how it used to look. But it's still so nice to play this at 60 FPS. The only caveat is it is double buffered V-synced, like Echoes of Wisdom. So when playing Tears of the Kingdom, when you get in a pretty complex vehicle and move at high speed, it does go to 30 FPS, which it's noticeable, but it's also a short-term thing. Wish it didn't do that, but it's not that big of an issue. But I do think when we look back at all the Switch 2 editions, like when Kirby's out and Mario Party's out, we probably will reflect on this one and be like, this didn't really add anything, did it? Like, this is just a performance one. When all the other ones add, like, new modes, Kirby's adding a whole new story. Yeah, it's a little bit disappointing as a Switch 2 edition, but as a result, you get a beautiful version of Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, two of the best games ever, so it's hard not to agree with Brandon's 9.
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult for me because these games were 10 out of 10 games when they released. You know, I have no doubt that were I the one putting the review score on for these games, I would have given them a perfect score. And it's hard to say that they dropped more than a full point since their release, because they still hold up remarkably well as games. But I do agree with you that I think as Switch 2 editions, if you separate, you know, the quality of the underlying game itself, which is wonderful, and you look strictly at what Nintendo is charging for, or, you know, what earned it the Switch 2 edition badge, it is very hard to differentiate it from games that they've given free updates to and haven't applied that branding.
Yeah. Well, let's move on to, I think, the last Switch 2 edition. There may be another one. Fantasy Life I, which is a funny one, because this was originally a Nintendo exclusive until for some reason that deal went up in the air. Level 5 published themselves, and then after that, the Switch 1 version just seemed to run worse and worse and worse. Every time they showed it, it released, Switch 1 version wasn't great. But then, not long after, at launch, we had the Switch 2 edition of this game, which seems to resolve basically everything.
Yeah, so this is the only game I've reviewed twice on the channel.
In a very similar span.
Yeah, so I updated our review score for the Switch 2 version to a 9, and there are reasons for that. So if you haven't seen either of my reviews, Fantasy Life is my favorite game of 2025 so far, beating everything that's on the Switch 2 currently. I've pumped tons and tons of hours into both the PlayStation and the Switch 2 versions of the game now. But the Switch 2 version, unlike the Switch versions, unlike the others, has local wireless play. And I can still hop in and play local wireless on the 3DS version, which I did for the review with my sister. And it's nice to know that there is a version that has minimal, compromises in terms of visual fidelity and performance, but also has that local wireless so that when the servers inevitably go down in any number of years, I won't be unable to play this game in multiplayer. So this is just a wonderful game. Like, if you haven't played this, I can't recommend it enough. It's a worthy successor to the 3DS version, which is coincidentally my favorite 3DS game of all time as well. And I'm probably like 100 hours deep in this game now, and I'm probably going to put several hundred more in because every couple weeks somebody I know picks this game up and I start playing it all over again with them. So lots and lots of fun to be had here. And the Switch 2 version is just the most accessible. It's the best for preservation. I do wish it had a physical card, but other than that, I have no real complaint.
Yeah, and you don't want to be tethered with this game. The handheld roots, they go back to 3DS. It's the kind of game that you pick up for a few minutes and just have a commitment-free play. And this is just the perfect place for that. I said this might be the last Switch 2 edition. I was lying. There are two more, so let's quickly do those. So there's Rune Factory and also Civ 7. Have you had time with either of those?
I've had time with both. So Rune Factory is probably my most recent Switch 2 pickup, so I've not played a ton of it, but I have played it enough to kind of get a feel for how it is, as a game overall. It's got mouse control, which I love. It makes farming a whole lot easier. It makes the kind of farm sim elements of it a whole lot more enjoyable, but it's also got a really robust combat system. And I tend to focus more on these. I'm not the biggest farming sim person, but I do love a good cel-shaded action game. And this kind of straddles the line between both of those genres. There's a lot of fan service stuff in this game. If you're into anime waifus and stuff like that, then this is likely going to be the game for you. There are some things that I've noted. It doesn't feel particularly Switch 2-y in places. In particular, trees look really horrendous in this game. And they'll do cutscenes where they're zoomed in really close on those models, and there's like no texturing on them. It's just a brown mass of polygons, which feels really, really out of place. I'm guessing that Marvelous just wanted to keep the frame rate at 60 FPS and did whatever they could to make sure of that. But again, as is the case with Split Fiction, I think maybe they cut a little too deep. But that being said, character models look fantastic. They're intentionally low detail because it's a cel-shaded game. So you're not gonna see pores like you might in Yakuza 0, but I think the anime style works really well for this game. I think the characters are likable, voice acting's fantastic. The action gameplay is a lot of fun, but this is a game that I recommend you go in with low expectations. Like if you're expecting AAA quality, this is one of those games that I would call a popcorn game. This is a game that you play just to really immerse yourself in. If you like, combat or farming mechanics, this is kind of a good non-critical thinking kind of game. I would give this one a 7.5 because the visual issues are pretty striking with it, but the core gameplay is really fun.
Nice. It's also another game that's on the cartridge, which is nice to see too.
Yes, that too.
So I guess let's just do the other one then, Civ 7. I am interested in this one because this is a very PC-heavy game, and yeah, it's just a very natural fit for that mouse. So how are you feeling about this version?
Exactly. I upgraded my Switch 1 version to the Switch 2 version. This one was a no-brainer. The minute I saw that the Switch 2 was going to have a mouse, I was like, oh, that's for Civ 7.
Yeah.
It really does feel like you're just playing the PC version of the game at this point. You use the mouse controls the way one would on any other Civilization game, and it works exactly how you'd expect. And that's probably the highest praise I can give it, is that, again, I've not sunk a lot of time into this one because I really just went in and was like, mouse controls, they work how I expect. And so I would say, the game looks as good as one might expect. It's not a particularly visually intense game because you're viewing things from very far out. I prefer to play this one in handheld mode, to be honest, just because, you can put it in tabletop mode and use the mouse controls to control the game that way. And it feels like you're basically taking a PC game with all the bells and whistles on the go. And I would say that's probably the primary benefit there, because if I wanted to play Civ 7, sat at something, I could do so just as easily at my PC. And it's a little more cumbersome to play docked mode, mouse mode if you're not at a desk. So for me, I don't really view this as like a couch game. I view it more as, a way to play Civ 7 if I'm not in a place where I have access to a full PC.
Makes me very interested and excited for the future, where we get games like just pure PC Sims, just pure unaltered, not a console version, just on the Switch 2. That'd be really, really interesting. And Civ 7's kind of the first glimpse of that.
Ironically, and I know you didn't mean it this way, but I'm very excited for the day where we hopefully get The Sims on the Switch 2, because that is a game that I've tried to play on console at various points.
It's never right. They never quite feel just like the PC version. Even like the Sims 4 console, which is pretty close, just controlling it with the controller never feels right.
Yeah, exactly. I would give Civ 7 an 8. I think that it's a game most people probably won't pick up on the Switch 2, because the fan base for this is already pretty strong on PC. But I think that if you do pick it up, you'll find that if you've never played a PC game like this is the way to play it. Outside of sitting down on a desktop and actually using whatever mouse you have at home, you'll get an experience that's so close that it will feel like you're playing a PC game, particularly if you play your Switch at a desk, which for this game I strongly recommend. I wouldn't use like the whole pant leg thing Nintendo tells you to do.
Well, let's move on to Welcome Tour. I gave this a 7 in our review, and I like it. I like it quite a bit. I think that it's a cool peek behind the curtain. You learn new things about the console. They genuinely do try and teach you how things work. Like there's a portion of the game where they teach you about backwards compatibility and how the code is adapted on the fly from Switch 1 code to Switch 2 code to keep the battery life high while doing like a layer of emulation in there. And it's just really cool to see that stuff. Some great mouse showcases in there too. A great use of VRR. There's one game where you can just adjust the frame rate to whatever figure you want and just see how it looks with VRR and learn the differences. It's just teaching you about the hardware. With a few pretty cool games in there too. Not for everyone though. I think you have to be interested in the tech and invested in that side. I've seen like John Linneman likes this game, Arlo likes this game, but you look at most comments on my review video, most of them are like, it should have been included, this definitely isn't a game. And like you compare it to like Astro's Playroom, it's also that's a gamey game, it's a very different thing. This is more like an educational museum, and I appreciate it for that. But I wouldn't put it any higher than a 7, though.
Yeah, it's really tough because this is one where it's easy to let your bias show, right? Because I like you, am I like to know this stuff. I'm very technically minded, and so it's interesting to hear from Nintendo themselves why they made some of the decisions they made. In particular, when I buy a new piece of hardware, I like to, look at it closely and see if it matches what other people have. And one of the things that bugged me when I got the Switch 2 was the little gap between the Joy-Con and the Switch itself. And I, until I played Welcome Tour, I thought, oh man, is it supposed to be like that? And sure enough, it is. And they explain they have a very good reason. And they kind of show you with these really cool illustrations, like how the connector moves inside the console to prevent you from breaking it off,
Right. And that was a viral thing. People were like, what is this design? It's just going to snap off. And they go into detail about why it won't just snap off.
Yeah, exactly. Which I think is so funny because obviously they had already built that probably months before people started talking about it.
Yeah.
And, and then you see stuff like the recent news with D-Brand and their kill switch case where they filled that air gap in. And because of it, Joy-Con pop off with that case. Which is exactly what Nintendo says would happen in Welcome Tour.
Yeah.
So I think that Welcome Tour is really cool if you're tech minded. If you're interested in the behind the scenes of the inner workings of how Nintendo engineers their hardware and stuff like that, which I very much am, then it's a really cool showcase. But simultaneously, you know, in our setup at home, I have a TV right in front of me, and to my right is my wife's TV, and we have this really funky couch where we can both sit so that we're looking at our individual gaming TVs and playing games together. And she turned to the left and was watching me play Welcome Tour, and she was like, "That looks so boring."
Yeah.
And I was like, I'm enthralled. I'm very amused by this.
Yeah,
and
it is not a backseat game. This is going to look like the most dull thing imaginable to any onlooker.
Yeah, exactly. She was like, "This is incredibly dry," and I was like, "I'll loan you the virtual game card," and she's like, I'm okay. So I get it, and I understand the thrust of these comments. Like, there are people who just don't care about this stuff, and I mean, I do largely agree with the idea that it should have been free. I think that, you know, it would have been a cool thing to include with every Switch console, but that said, it's super cheap. It's like, what, $9.99?
Yeah, it should have been bundled. You know, it feels like a packing game. It's teaching about the console. It's basically it's a toy. It's called Welcome Tour. It should be included, but the reality is it isn't. So I guess just judge it for what it is. And I think it's still fun.
Yeah, I agree with your 7. I think that it's very interesting for people like us. But if you peel that layer away and you try to be as unbiased as possible, there's not a whole lot of game here.
No, there isn't. Yeah. So yeah, let's just keep moving on then, I guess. I don't know if you've played the Switch 2 version of Suikoden. I haven't personally, but I have played the Switch version. And this one takes it to 1440p 60 FPS. For some reason, the Switch version wasn't 60 FPS, these 2D PlayStation games. I say PlayStation, they've remastered them with like real-time lighting and shadows, and it's like a hybrid of HD 2D. So I can't give a score to this given I haven't played the Switch 2 version, but I love the originals. The Switch 1 game is great with a few frame drops in there, and I imagine this just irons everything out.
Yeah, unfortunately, I can't give this one a score either because I have not played this one yet. It is my one blind spot so far.
And it's so weird that there's no upgrade path. Yeah, this didn't come out that long ago. It was like a few months ago on Switch 1, and it's digital only with no upgrade, which is bizarre. I would love to give this a score because I love this game, but no, I haven't played the Switch 2 one. So what are we left with, Steve? What do we have left that you've played or we've played?
Let's see. I'm looking through our list here.
I've gone in a weird order, so we've got to actually look at what we've got left. We haven't talked about Survival Kids, which I'm pretty sure neither of us have played.
I don't think anyone has played that. I don't know that it's sold any copies.
Has anyone at Konami played this game? I played the original Game Boy game out of curiosity, and I think it's very charming. And I look at the remake, and I'm like, I'm never going to play this.
Yeah, the remake looks really, really bad.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't think that we have. For instance, Shine Post is Japan exclusive. I've not played that. I did not pick up Nobunaga's Ambition.
We got Deltarune, which Daniel has reviewed. I've not had a chance to play it yet.
I have shamefully not finished Undertale, so I've not begun Deltarune yet. I have it, I just have not played it because I refuse to play it until I finish Undertale.
I'm just verifying he gave it a 9. I'm pretty sure he did give it a 9, but I'm double checking.
He did.
You did, okay. Yeah, so that might be our lot for now. That's the majority of Switch 2 launch games reviewed. Only like a small handful, 4 or so, that we haven't touched there. But it's been a pretty good launch. Not a whole lot of brand new games, but some pretty definitive ways to play older games, and just it's nice to be untethered with games that previously couldn't run on the Switch 1, like Street Fighter 6.
Yeah, exactly. I think the key here is that across all these launch titles, a common theme is that they keep pace with the current gen versions just enough that, you know, you can see cuts if you're looking, but they're not really tangibly changing how these games play for the most part.
Yeah, like Shadow Generations, clearly it's lower res, but playing in handheld mode while you're speeding around, it's not something you're really looking for, and you're just left with an unadulterated version of Shadow Generations. It just plays like you remember it playing, and if you played it on Switch 1, no upgrade path, but it is a night and day difference playing that at 60 FPS. And I've always wanted just a pure Sonic Generations on the go, you know? And Switch 1 gave us that. A locked 32 FPS for some reason. So it's nice just to have a nice, non-weird portable version of Sonic Generations. And that's the kind of game I'm just going to pull out whenever, you know, because it's just a nice, easy pick up and play one.
Yeah, exactly. I think that a lot of these games, you know, are either a great supplement to the existing versions or they're just outstanding in their own right. Like, I don't see a need to play, for instance, No Man's Sky. I would prefer to trade off the portability for whatever additional visual fidelity the PS5 can offer. I think having that in the palm of my hand is way better than being tethered to a TV. Cyberpunk is a great supplement to, you know, the other versions of it where I might choose to play Phantom Liberty when I'm at home on a console or a PC. Taking, you know, I went up to a cabin right after the Switch 2 came out and I played that game, you know, in the middle of a forest. And so that was a lot of fun. You know, being able to have that freedom is really is something that adds a layer to these games that other platforms just really can't top.
Yeah, it's added a lot of confidence to the future of Switch 2. We still don't really know a whole lot of the lineup going forward. Hopefully that's resolved soon, but we know like Sonic Racing Cross Worlds is going to be on Switch 2, and I'm going to play it there. You know, like Shadow Generations has given me the confidence that that's going to be 60 FPS. It's going to look good. I'm happy to play that there. I'm sure Capcom are going to port the Resident Evils, like 7, 8, 4. I'm sure they're going to come. I'll happily play those on Switch 2. Just a good variety of genres, big AAA games that don't usually come to Nintendo, like Hitman, that's never really been on apart from, I think, one GameCube game. So yeah, just a really good launch. Not that many like brand new games, but just a nice launch. And then you've also got GameCube NSO if you want to keep yourself busy. All those free Switch 1 updates, all the backwards compatible games that just run better. It feels kind of endless right now, to be honest.
Yeah, this is one of the better console launches I've had in my time doing all this, which is most of it. You know, it's crazy to see. Every time I go back and I play an old Switch 1 game, I find that it is in some way better than it was before. And that's why we have so many of these games up on the channel, you know, where you can see these performance updates in action, even if they are technically unpatched games, or not even technically. In a lot of cases, these are fully unpatched games that just perform better because the developers left the frame rate uncapped, or you know, the load times aren't artificially slowed down to some degree for whatever reason. So it's really cool to see. I think the Switch 2 is in a good place right now. There are a lot of questions about what we're going to see for the rest of the year, but there's so much to play right now that I really don't feel like I'm worried about what I'm going to be doing in the next couple of months.
No, same here. And Donkey Kong is like 3 weeks away, so we're very close to that too. Anyway, I think we're going to draw it there. We've been going long enough. A lot of games covered here. And now we're ready to just tackle the future, whatever games come next. So thank you so much for watching, everybody. Game Bear Benji, I hope you get your PlayStation 2 Kingdom Hearts ports on the brand new Switch 2. We will see you next time. That should be a thing. Anyway, thanks so much for watching, guys. Catch you later. Bye-bye.
Bye.